And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Well, today of all days, I mean, what a great day to be on the Morgan Streetman Show, here with you, our listening audience. And if you want to call us and get on the lines and you have some comment to make about the Mueller report, we'd love to have you on. The number to call is 888-404-1010. And as I think you probably know by now, the summary of the Mueller report was released late yesterday by the Attorney General, William Barr, and it essentially concluded the Mueller report, which is now, we're talking about a 2-year investigation. That's just the involvement of Bob Mueller in a special counsel position investigating this. But we really need to add another about year and a half back before that, because they've been investigating this since at least July of 2016. And what is it that they've supposedly been investigating, right? Russian collusion, as everybody was calling it on the news. But then you got the coy folks like James Comey, former FBI director, and he's saying, well, collusion is a word that I'm not familiar with, as though he doesn't know regular English words. Okay, conspiracy. That's what they're talking about, conspiracy. And the report came out, and after, I don't know, it was about $35 million that we spent on the Mueller investigation. I mean, can you imagine that? We had to spend 2 years and $35 million to get to the following conclusion. Quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Now, for those of you that follow these stories closely and you've stuck with us over the years, you already know that the Russian election interference activities were extremely minimal. We're talking to the tune of less than $10,000 in total.
In Facebook ads, right?
Yeah, in Facebook ads and money spent in Google, according to executives from both companies in congressional testimony. Believe me, if there was more, they would have testified honestly about it. But there simply was not very much. So those of you that have been paying attention to this and have been paying attention to us, you already know that there effectively was no Russian interference in the election. But for whatever reason, the D.C. swamp won't let this part of the fairy tale go. And that probably goes back to something that we told you, gosh, I don't know, about 3 years ago, which is watch it. Watch, because the United States is going to be fired up into a war posture with Russia. Pat George, you remember when we talked about that on this show?
Time and again.
Time and again, we said, watch this happen. Because at the time, remember, it wasn't the case that Russia was our sworn enemy and certainly the greatest enemy the United States has ever faced. Heck, I remember a debate, where Mitt Romney said that Russia was our greatest enemy. If you remember, Barack Obama was making fun of him. Mm-hmm. He said, ha, 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 the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back. And everybody laughed and all the chattering classes. This is so funny. You're so stupid, Mitt Romney, making stuff up like that. Then give us another, couple of years. And here they are. They're doing the same thing. They're making all this crap up. So they're not letting go of that. Because the truth of the matter is, in general, the military-industrial complex still wants to go to war with Russia. So we're going to find some reason. It's going to be Venezuela. Syria obviously wasn't it. We'll find something, eventually, and we'll wind up in some kind of a war posture with them.
Democrats like to fight.
Boy, the Democrats turned into neocons over the past 2 years. Have you noticed that? I mean, this is the party of the pink hats. This is remember the Code Pink protesters back during the George W. Bush years, how anti-war the Democrat Party was, and I can't believe what we did in Iraq, and what never again, never again.
Do you think there will be any segment, because already you hear Maxine Waters saying, this is not over, this is not finished yet. Do you think there's any portion of the Democratic Party that's like, you know what, the reports lays it all out there, let's move on because we've got bigger things to take care of? Or do you think the majority of the Democratic Party is like, no, let's just keep no matter what party you're aligned with,
Right.
then you agree or disagree with the report, and you want the investigation to keep going.
Right. Well, I mean, I think Nancy Pelosi, with her statement that she didn't want to pursue impeachment, I think she was kind of giving you a little bit of a preview that, the truth is that they probably would like to just drop it and move on because for their purposes, they've accomplished what they wanted, which is the complete frustration of the Donald Trump presidency. The complete frustration. I mean, we're getting ready to get back into an election cycle. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And the whole time, his whole first 2 years of his whole presidency, he's been essentially on the run from this witch hunt. But the report totally clears him. It completely exonerates him. And I'll tell you, go ahead.
Do you agree with this? We're looking. Morgan and I are looking at a headline right now. This is Giuliani from an attorney perspective. Yeah. Is that a fair statement?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's the same thing that William Barr said. You can't obstruct justice if there's no underlying crime, right? Because the obstruction of justice has to be wrongful, which means you have to be trying to cover up some kind of underlying crime. But if there was no Russian collusion, which is what's been concluded, and again, I mean, folks, is there any doubt in your mind that if there was even just a shred of evidence of Russian collusion, that we would have heard about it? Because they haven't been able to leak even just one thing over the entire 2-year period, even just one thing that shows Russian collusion. But yeah, I sat around and watched CNN yesterday, and they essentially said, well, it doesn't exonerate him. It doesn't prove there was no collusion. It just says that, well, it does say that there's no collusion. It says that there's no collusion, and they're trying to make it say something else that it doesn't say. They're trying to suggest that it says, and I read this on a Reuters headline, that the Mueller report finds the president didn't knowingly conspire with Russia. Hello? You cannot unknowingly conspire. That's a completely pointless modifier that they added there as though, well, maybe the Trump organization unknowingly conspired. No, that's false. And they just won't let this go, will they? They just won't let it go. And now they're hanging it all on the idea, well, the report doesn't exonerate him for the obstruction of justice charge. But to your point, Roxanne, yes, it does. Because you don't have an obstruction of justice charge unless there was the underlying Russian conspiracy charge. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, He's not
trying to cover anything up.
There's nothing to obstruct. Mm-hmm. There's no justice to be obstructed, right? Mm-hmm. So the one requires the other. So it's really disingenuous. And I think, I think the Mueller investigation, frankly, I don't think has been completely above board. I've now finished Sidney Powell's book, License to Lie. And I have a much better understanding of who the pit bull Andrew Weissman is. And
Who is he?
Well, he's one of the people on Mueller's team. In fact, he's the one who probably wrote the report, they say. Now, he was also involved with the Enron and Arthur Anderson prosecutions back in the early 2000s.
Really? Okay.
All of which have been overturned for prosecutorial misconduct. The Sidney Powell wrote a book called License to Lie. It's the number one.
You wouldn't know that because there is no Arthur Anderson anymore.
That's right. Thanks to them, they destroyed that company, and you actually have some knowledge of that because you were in that business way back when. So they destroyed that company, but it's the holier than thou prosecutors who don't apparently care about actual justice. In other words, there's this old phrase in the law, and that is the state always wins when justice is done. And that means that the state isn't really out to convict. They're out for justice to be done. So if justice means conviction, then that's what the state wants. But if justice means that the individual charged should be acquitted, then that's what the state wants. See, because the state never loses when justice is done. But there's a whole group of prosecutors who pretend like it's a game. And I guess to them it is a game because they're not on the receiving end of their prosecutorial conduct. And so it's very easy for them to play around with other people's lives and just not take it seriously because it's not directly affecting them. They don't understand what they're putting people through, or they're not taking the time to really understand it. So after learning about all of this prosecutorial misconduct at the Department of Justice over many years and many different investigations and prosecutions, all involving Andrew Weissman and another small cadre of Department of Justice prosecutors who seem to believe that the end justifies the means and they have a win-at-all-cost strategy. But after learning about them, I really have no respect for the team that Bob Mueller put together. Now, folks, we have to remember the things that we learned about the team, like remember the lover boy and lover girl, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and they had all these text messages back and forth. And then remember how once Bob Mueller found out about that, he kicked them off the team right away? You remember all that? Well, you remember the fact that the only reason anybody even found out about that was because there was an ongoing Inspector General's investigation? And because Andrew McCabe had lied, Lisa Page gave him her cell phone. We're going to pick that back up on the other side of this break, folks. Stick with us.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. So, Morgan, while you were busy at work today, Pat George and I were on Twitter and watching some of Savannah Guthrie in her interview with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And boy, she was going after her because she wanted Sarah to explain why President Trump isn't apologizing or hasn't apologized to Mueller, and doesn't he owe him an apology? And it was just strange. I mean, she was interrupting her. You could tell she was definitely, it was going crazy on Twitter.
She was, to say the least, very, very angry at the outcome of this report. And Twitter was not happy with her.
No, which is odd.
Right.
Because I'm surprised that shows you how many people must have been complaining, because usually the only thing that rises to the top on Twitter would be people making fun of Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Right. When I was watching CNN, for a good solid, I wasn't really watching it. I had it on in the background for a good solid 3-4 hours yesterday. And, I had to witness Wolf Blitzer correcting just about every guest that they had, every panelist that they had, because they all wanted to say something along the lines of, well, Bob Mueller didn't actually conclude that there was no Russian conspiracy. And Wolf Blitzer would have to say, no, actually, that's exactly what the letter says. So I know you're in denial about it, folks, but that's exactly what the letter says. And does anyone understand the presumption of innocence? That means unless you're proved guilty, you're innocent. Mm-hmm. You get the presumption of innocence. It's not just, there's a lot of things that were written about in the Mueller report, and generally where there's smoke, there's fire. No, if there was something that they could convict him on, a crime, they would have charged him, and they would be pursuing it, and they came out and said there's nothing. They have
crazy
nothing. After 2 years, zero, nothing. And I just find it amazing that people don't want to accept that. What they're essentially saying, which is what we've already known here for the whole time we've been on this show, and we've been saying, look, there's no collusion here. This is our president. Right? This is our president. Now, you would think that it would be good news. Couldn't you rise above partisan politics just a little bit and be glad that...
Absolutely not. They're not going to do that.
No, they're not happy, are they? Nobody's happy on the Democrat side about this situation. 2 weeks ago, all we heard about was how much everybody trusted Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller would never say anything that was wrong. Well, now he's come out and he said there's no collusion, and they're all like, well, we don't know about that. He must have been under some political pressure, or, I heard somebody say the other day, well, I haven't seen any reason to question Bob Mueller's integrity.
Well, the funny thing, too, is when you think about Savannah Guthrie asking those questions, well, shouldn't he apologize to him now because Trump made all these terrible comments about Mueller throughout the investigation, and now that he gave him a good review, shouldn't he apologize to him? No, well, that doesn't make any sense. There's no logic there. Wasn't he supposed to do his job no matter what kinds of feedback he was getting from Trump?
Yeah, and how would you feel if you were wrongly investigated? If somebody made some crap up about you, because that's exactly what happened. Top level people within the FBI And now that Representative Doug Collins has been kind enough to release some of the closed-door testimony from Lisa Page and Bruce Orr and others, we now know that there were discussions among those top-level people about the fact that, one, this Russia investigation was an insurance policy. That text message that we've read to you over and over and over again, it means what it says. Lisa Page admits that. The insurance policy was the Russia investigation. Now, what else has come out? Because, they drib and drab this stuff out. They're running out the clock on us, folks. They've been doing this for 2 years. Finally, now, some text messages between Lisa Page and her boss, Andy McCabe, have come out. And in that, they discussed the fact that they knew they were supposed to inform the FISA court that this dossier that they were submitting to get a warrant to spy on President Trump's campaign, that this dossier was cooked up by people working for Hillary Clinton, that it was opposition research. Research is probably the wrong word. It was opposition fiction writing that was done for political purposes. And remember, they buried that in a footnote in the FISA application. I'm sure none of the judges even picked up on it. So we know that they knew that they were supposed to reveal this because their own communications cover that fact, that they knew they were supposed to tell the FISA court about the bias. And we know that they didn't make that clear to the FISA court because the truth is the whole thing was made up. They knew it was made up. It was made up as an insurance policy. They knew that. They really didn't ever think that they were going to use this insurance policy because they never thought that you and me would be stupid enough to elect President Trump. Okay? They never thought we would be that stupid. This is what they say in their text messages, folks. We're not making anything up here. This is all essentially direct quotes or paraphrases of direct quotes. So they never thought they were actually going to have to account for any of this bad conduct. They thought that once Madam Hillary Clinton became president, that all this would be swept under the rug. And the truth is, if they had dropped it when Trump became president, I think he was basically looking to sweep things under the rug and not make a long, drawn-out partisan fight. And all that we can hope now, after we've been through this 2-year witch hunt, and there's nothing to show for it, nothing. All we can hope now is that they've made Trump angry enough, President Trump angry enough, that he will want to do something about it. And that's certainly the noise that's being made, as he talked about over the weekend. He said, this was an illegal, and that's what it was. I mean, understand that what they wanted to do was unseat a sitting president because they thought that he was unworthy of being president and that you folks who voted for him were stupid for voting for him. And because you're too stupid to know what's good for you, they were going to come in and pull a little trick. It was going to be a little Russia trick. And they were going to first, they thought, make sure he never gets elected. Because we'll spy on him and then we'll find some dirt while we're spying on him. And then we'll leak that and he'll never get elected. Problem is they didn't find that dirt, so they didn't have anything to leak on him. And he got elected. Well, and then they thought, well, now that he's been elected, we'll stymie his administration, and we'll just keep looking. And remember how they talked about Bob Mueller's, his mandate is completely unlimited. He can look into anything. He can look into the Trump organization. He can look into Trump's finances. He can look into President Trump's baby pictures and whoever photographed those pictures. He can go that far back. We were told that Bob Mueller can do whatever he wants to do. And he has a very broad mandate. Now, listening to CNN yesterday, I learned that actually Bob Mueller had a very narrow mandate. And his report really wasn't expected to tell us much of anything. We never thought we were going to get anything from his report. We always knew that Bob Mueller was only looking into an extremely narrow issue of Russian conspiracy, certainly much narrower than what the Congress is looking into. And we never thought we were going to get anything out of that. I mean, this is what people on the panels were actually saying yesterday.
Explain why it's illegal to release the whole report. They were talking about that on Charlie's show with the sardine.
Illegal is probably the wrong word.
Okay.
There is a special counsel regulation. just in general, remember the whole James Comey thing where he came out and he said, I'm not going to indict Hillary Clinton, but I'm going to tell you what I think of what she's done anyway. Remember that whole shebang? Mm-hmm. And a lot of commentators said, number one, that violates DOJ policy. And that's what the Inspector General said. You can't do that. When you're not going to charge somebody with a crime, it's not the time to go through all of the tips that you received. True, untrue, whatever. It's not the time to go through and pick through all the mud that you raked up over the last couple of years in the investigation. Because if you got something to charge them with, then charge them. If you're not going to charge them, you're just slandering them. You're just making a bunch of supposition. You're just giving people a bunch of fodder to think that maybe a crime occurred, kind of like what they were doing on CNN yesterday, where they're trying to say, well, clearly something must have happened here. And that's why that's why they want the whole Mueller report, because they want to pick and choose and they want to re-argue and they want to say, well, look what this witness statement says, or look what that piece of evidence says. And they want to say Bob Mueller didn't consider the evidence properly. He didn't weigh it correctly. They want to re-weigh it. They want to redo his decision. But you don't get to do that. Okay? Number one, you don't know everything he knows. But more importantly, this was the process that was set up. His decision is final. You don't get to get an unfavorable decision from him and say, well, obviously he didn't get it right, so now we're going to just redo this whole investigation.
Well, there's a bunch of Democrats that say they can't wait to get their hands on the report and read the whole thing. Will that ever happen?
Well, I'm not sure. I think they probably will eventually get the whole report. I don't think it matters. I don't think William Barr would for 1 second write up a summary that doesn't accurately summarize the report, because he knows other people are going to see that, and he knows he'd be subject to criticism if he made stuff up.
You said it earlier, but how much has this cost taxpayers?
It's like $38 million.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, give
Can
me
you
a break.
imagine what we could do with $38 million? I mean,
yeah.
But to the government, that's
it's
probably
nothing.
not that
Who cares?
much. That's nothing. Mm-hmm.
Well, to them, it's nothing
So inefficient.
because they don't ever have to reach into their pockets and fund anything. They'll reach into our pockets. This is all paid for by us, and it was all a farce. I mean, there's no conspiracy, period. That's a complete exoneration. If there's no conspiracy, there's no obstruction of justice. I mean, the obstruction of justice idea, the charge, whatever you want to call it, the suggestion that the president obstructed justice had so many problems with it. I mean, just a couple here, just to remind you. Don't you know that James Comey presided over the FBI when they allowed 3 independent contractors complete unsupervised access to the FISA database, meaning that they could run searches without warrants in violation of the 4th Amendment to the United States Constitution on U.S. citizens? And they apparently did that on 5,000 of us. You know, who only knows who was included in that? You think it might have included Sean Hannity? You think it might have included Rush Limbaugh? You think it might have included Mark Levin? You think it might have included some of their political enemies? You know it did. You know that's exactly what they were doing. You going to say something?
No, I just saw this headline that Pat just showed us. Former Clinton advisor says Democrats risk backlash if they don't accept Mueller findings and move on.
I think they really do, because they've been telling the American people.
That?
They've been telling the American people over and over and over again how honorable Bob Mueller is, how they would accept what Bob Mueller had to say, and now Bob Mueller said it, and it's time to accept it and move on.
That's a former Clinton advisor that said that.
The only thing I think is it's time to move on now to looking at prosecuting the people who cooked up this coup. Andrew McCabe, James Comey, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Bruce Orr. These people, Glenn Simpson, these people need to be prosecuted. These people need to be looked into. We need a special counsel to look into them. Stick with us. We'll go out there when we come back. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And don't forget to exercise your brain at least once a week.